Hello everybody, welcome to the VCT Americas Week 6 recap. I am Gus's editor and he forgot to record an intro, so it's my job today. Yeah, nothing much else to say. Enjoy the video.
Back in 2021, Mike's HD, the current head coach of 100 Thieves, was controversially removed from Envy due to a contract dispute, or what is now known as the core of NRG. With a must-win stake for both teams at this point of the season, Mike's first game as a head coach against his former coaching staff in Chet and his former teammates in NRG is his biggest test yet as a head coach. The re-debut of Bind into the map pool at first actually meant smooth sailing for 100 Thieves. 100 Thieves on Bind lost more than 5 attacking rounds only twice in the entirety of 2022, only losing out to Fnatic and Xset. And that production was what we saw in the first half. 100 Thieves started off on the right foot, trading a few rounds and winning the pistol, 5-2. But from this exact point forward for the rest of the series, 100 Thieves only went on to double their current round count. NRG shut down 100 Thieves' momentum on a half buy by sending 3 immediately down short A, and with a quick wrap, they get reset and subsequently get swept on a waterfall out of hookah by a 3K from Crashies. And like the 1v4 attempt from Derek, 100 Thieves' attempts were all for naught for the rest of Bind. 100 Thieves just weren't ready for the smoke on Bind nor on Fracture. As on Fracture,
Fracture.
for the final time in the regular season, we are witnessing Brazil versus Brazil. For now. But it may be the most turbulent game yet. Both teams come into this game at a bit of an off-swing on their path to playoffs. Furia actually proved themselves to be a pretty solid playoff contender earlier on this season, coming out of Super Week with a 3-2 record. But they haven't really had a consistent result for the last 4 games, winning one and losing one and continuing that pattern, with both of their wins actually going to map 3. In the meanwhile, MIBR actually looked pretty much on the same level as Furia during their own early uptick. But after Super Week, they ended up getting completely halted, only winning 18 rounds the entire weekend. MIBR's bid to be playoff contenders have been postponed until this week against Furia. The last time Furia were on Pearl, Furia come into this map with a much more meta-centric comp with yet another shakeup of roles. Khalil is now on the KJ instead of the double initiator no sentinel setup from before. Viper is now going to Mazine, Jet instead of Neon for DGZine, and the only consistency being QCK on the Harbor. The first half started with multiple flanks going awry for Furia, and MIBR already start to look firm at 5-1. Furia, however, were already able to throw off the B take with a couple of picks despite a cardiac play from Maurice. MIBR end up sneaking in around with a Viper's Pit exec, but Furia end up at least chipping away at the scoreline with some scrappy success on B takes, including the last round of the half, 8-4 half. As the second half got started, some things started to become pretty apparent. MIBR were simply not ready for Furia. Every gun round was contested in B long at the beginning, and for the first 7 rounds, Furia were able to roll with a 2+ man advantage going into the post plant. It was a simple numbers game at that point, where MIBR were kicking themselves for fighting too much in the early round. It was 11-8 where MIBR finally ended up getting themselves back in with, would you guess it, an A take instead. The one time that Furia end up going to the other side of the map, they end up giving momentum back to their opponents. And MIBR take full advantage of Furia continuing to go to the lesser favored A site and end up tying up the game at 11-11. Furia have 2 wolves, one that goes A and one that goes B. The wolf that goes B is a Chad, an alpha, an absolute specimen. The wolf that goes A is none of these things. The B wolf comes out for the last 2 rounds, and despite MIBR's best efforts including a 3v2 advantage, the A wolf does not come out in the end. Furia wins map 1. Furia lets the Kraken out on split. Jet is in for chamber for DGZine, and it could not have been a better look for Furia in the first half. MIBR started with some pretty crucial individual mistakes, like a double satchel going awry and them just not checking corners. MIBR were, however, able to collect 2 rounds off of a lockdown and a Viper's Pit exec. But Furia went back to looking red hot, holding back almost every exec from MIBR. DGZine held it down, going 4-0 on first kill, first death on defense. Marie's trolled.
Time is short now. Ooh, they're waiting. They're waiting a real long time here.
Player standing.
FRZ
He doesn't have time! He doesn't have time!
He pulled off!
He pulled off!
He pulled off!
Last player standing.
That's devastating!
And MIBR, despite planting the last 3 rounds and holding Khalil to only 3 kills in the half, were exploited by Furia the entire way, 10-2. There's not much to really say though about the second half, despite the good fight from MIBR. In the end, Furia only needed 3 rounds on the half, and they pulled out their cheesiest setups for them, with 2 fakes and a Viper's Pit exec. Furia firmly finishes MIBR and flourishes to 4-2 on the season. If 100 Thieves in NRG felt like a stomp, well, it was, but this game was too. Sentinels' first mistake was picking Lotus against Cloud9. Cloud9 claimed that they smoked Paper Rex and 100 Thieves on this map. So this map is looking like a huge test for Kaplan, already to see how he can counter a top team. Because again, to pick Lotus against Cloud9, you gotta be pretty confident. Sentinels got the pistol round after some players from Cloud9 went back into the site too early to fight the initial take, and Zekin ended up getting a triple. They even ended up winning their bonus with a late lurk to open up the rotation for Marved. But from here on out, Cloud9 went on to have the first real farm of America so far. C9 win their half bye with Bancada and Marved frankly throwing their lives. And for the rest of this map, Sentinels go on to win only 1 more round. Leaf was always in the right place and the right time on this map. He went 15-7 in the first half while also being an extremely mobile player in the middle of execs, with Jake also having a similar form, going 14-7 and also having a 3-1 in terms of opening duels on defense. Marv got exploited the entire map though, and he really couldn't help out in crucial rounds where his utility was needed. After a 13-4 on Lotus, there still actually really wasn't much for me to add about the rest of this game either. Cloud9 started the game with a 10-0 lead on Fracture, almost looking like Cloud9's first 13-0. Sentinels ended up putting up a few rounds on defense for consolation, but after 3 Cloud9 players dropped 15 plus kills in the first half of Fracture, Zekin ended up only going 1-11 in opening kills in the entire series, and he actually also ended up going only 2-12 against Leaf in the series. There was legitimately 0 chance for Sentinels in this best of 3. This was the first certified destruction of America so far. Leviathan. These lads were pegged as one of the best in NA going into the season, and according to Plat Chat that one week, the best? Their opponent though this week is Evil Geniuses, currently one of the laughingstocks of the Americas League. 4 losses and 1 win against Crew of all teams. 13-0'd by Loud and Roster Mania? Surely there's no way that this could be an interesting game, right? Well, let's think about it a little bit more. Leviathan, results-wise, were looking good heading into the league, but have definitely faltered a bit domestically. Some strong wins versus teams like NRG and Sentinels, sure, not bad, but also narrow losses to teams like, a Furia and a struggling 100 Thieves. Meanwhile, Evil Geniuses, well, okay, they're 1-4, right? They've been struggling to find wins, but they've at least fought teams pretty closely. That 13-0 against Loud becomes a little bit more respectable when you remember that the third map, it was a best of 3, right? And they had actually slapped them silly on Split. Their losses to teams like MIBR, like mentioned before, were definitely still close. In all, Evil Geniuses seemed to be performing pretty decently, but could never close things out. Maybe there was a chance in this matchup after all. Map 1 was Split. the same map that Evil Geniuses had taken off of Loud. It all started with a reactive B hit. Leviathan held on thanks to a very slick one and done position from Takalila, and Leviathan were able to make it a quick 2-0, but were actually denied the bonus win, getting Evil Geniuses on the board. Although they traded rounds for a while, Leviathan eventually pulled out on top in the first half, 8-4. The attack side from Evil Geniuses seemed to rely a lot on Jagamo's ability to create space. If that went wrong, then mid-round audibles or split pushes, fitting, were their bread and butter. The second half got off to the best start that all three Evil Geniuses fans could ever ask for. A crazy 5v5 retake on pistol, and a pretty clean second round. Even the bonus round was a bit of a gamble, as it came down to a narrow 1v1 that Mazzino won out. Leviathan's attack side honestly seemed pretty similar to EG's, probably because of their mirror comps. Lots of their plays relied on the double dive duelist that they had, and early round gambits for space. But Evil Geniuses kept holding on, and they eventually had a vice grip on the defense, complete with great retakes. Even when Leviathan tried changing the pace, EG were able to weather the storm, and even if they gave up the site, generally pushed the aggressive post-plant positions of Leviathan, and in the end, were able to win out split 13-10. Next was Pearl, Leviathan's pick. And, oh god, this was bound to be rough. Leviathan have never lost Pearl in an official, although, of course, results really only go back to February. But going into the map, we once again met with mirror comps. The Wild Viper Harbor combo reared its ugly head as we started with the most classic of plays, Rush B, more stop. And obviously, there was a lot more to it, such as Boostio waiting for the spawn push, meeting 3 people and dying, as long as Jagamo on Harbor doing his damnedest to hold down the line with a shorty in the back hall. With all of that being said, it was too much for EG to handle, and they dropped the first round. Yeah, that was just the pistol. Honestly though, a lot of this half looks pretty similar, only with a different set of guns. Quick B hits, usually leaving a gift for Leviathan to discover late in mid, or even sitting in their own spawn to punish some flanks. But sometimes EG will feel frisky enough and throw in an art to A hit with the help of local AC-130 Demon 1. In all seriousness, the general trend is that Evil Geniuses really only try an A hit if they have an ultimate to make it less daunting. If they have lockdown, pop that sucker once you have the space and fight for art on the post plant. If you have Harbor ult, do the exact same thing, but send one late into art. If you have Blade Storm, focus art heavily and lean your jet in that direction for better pathing. The rounds they try going to A without one of those ults, they just don't have a good time. Otherwise, they finish B. For the most part, despite B site being a nightmare to retake because of the never-ending spam from long, Leviathan do a pretty good job and keep things tied at 6 apiece at the half. The second half pistol goes the way of EG though, making things very spooky for Leviathan. Okay, they just won the Thrifty without losing a single player. Oh, yeah, okay. Very clearly, the momentum has rolled back in the favor of Leviathan's favor. When both teams got good guns in their hands, it still kept going, and Leviathan found themselves up 10-7. At around this point, although, I'm sure that there is a lot to say going on about the strategy in these two teams. It's easier to kind of point and laugh and say, another B rush and play post plant. But that's because we end up seeing quite a bit of that. In rounds like round 19, EG even have the right idea and send a flank to pincer long B, but they still lose to time because of the sheer amount of denial that Leviathan had. At this point, it's getting pretty scary. However, King has calibrated the perfect and most genius read after all of this information has been gained over the last 2 rounds and ends up calling the great game-winning play, go B with ults. Leviathan end up finishing it off 13-10 and send us to the decider of Ascent. Evil Geniuses started out red hot, winning the pistol and the follow-up, but they ended up getting slapped on the bonus. The first gun round from Leviathan felt super experimental, with a really strict default in attempts to sniff out the Evil Geniuses setup and seemingly giving a lot of emphasis towards mid. They end up winning that round, But as for the next few rounds, Leviathan seemed dead set on disregarding defaults and going for quick plays. And eventually, they started to realize that it really wasn't doing the trick, and they found themselves down 5-2. In round 8, Leviathan finally seemed poised for an aggressive A split, but they were stopped by an early ult from Calm. Down but not out, Leviathan are now forced to play a little bit slower and look for a kill instead, and Mazzino ended up getting exactly what they were looking for towards A, leaving EG to gamble on that site. And them gambling that site is exactly what Leviathan would have wanted if Ethan wasn't on the other side of the map, getting 4 kills instead. Leviathan at this point seemed to be ramming their heads against the wall. Sure, Evil Geniuses are also doing a fantastic job in pivoting their setup and stopping these early plays, but it seems like even Leviathan themselves are really starting to think that they're taking things too fast, and it takes until round 10 for them to go back to defaulting. After showing presence A main and mid, they exec B in the mid round. The one problem though is that they're almost all stuck on site, with the exception of Mazzino, who he's doing his best. They all get destroyed on the retake and EG continue winning. It really does seem like Evil Geniuses has Leviathan's number right now, as it's 9-3 at the half. And as everyone knows, it's impossible to lose when you're up 9-3. Yeah, it's getting a bit scary for Evil Geniuses, as Taco Lila now has eventually discovered the quote-unquote operator weapon in this video game. And admittedly for Evil Geniuses, it's pretty rough for them to deal with. At 10-9 though, they were finally able to overcome it thanks to some heavy utility pressure early on to force Taco Lila off of the problematic angles. Alongside that was an aggressive default from the rest of EG to make his positioning a gamble. And then on top of that, a classic lockdown execute. Even then, Taco Lila proved to be a pain in the ass for Evil Geniuses, as they lost Ethan very early on in round 21, forcing some miracle work out of everyone else. With some clever mid and late round calls ending up with Evil Geniuses winning the round even when they're down their flash initiator. Boostio is able to contain 2 players over towards B, and a walk-up catwalk is enough to catch Leviathan off guard. Eventually, we find ourselves at 12-10, and Leviathan tried changing up the pace of their defense, pushing A main and mid right off of the rip. I'm hyping this up like it's some sort of heroic call, but it's not that at all. They got fucking destroyed in like 10 seconds. But wait a minute. With that, Evil Geniuses have actually done it. They have upset one of the top teams in North America. What this means for Leviathan really lies in the eye of the beholder. But I think we can all agree that after this game, Evil Geniuses have 4 fans. Crew versus Loud. On paper, it looked like a hydrogen bomb versus a crying baby situation. The best team, so far, in the Americas League in Loud, up against the bottom feeders and winless Crew. As if the head-to-head on paper wasn't rough enough, Crew also announced that Davies would be unable to play, and they'd also have to use their substitute Asheti. First up was Pearl, Loud's map pick, and notably the map that they 13-0'd EG on the week prior. It started out basically how everyone expected. Loud winning the pistol, follow-up, and even the bonus round and the first gun round. However, once Crew got on the board a little after, they actually managed to scrape together a pretty okay defensive half considering the circumstances at 8-4. On attack, Crew played what is honestly one of the most basic ass sides that you can imagine. Lots of B execs and leaving nags to lurk mid. Yeah, I mean, they also threw in a good amount of A hits as well, but they didn't have a ton of luck with them. Sure, you could dissect a lot more of what's happening with these rounds, but the super simple way to think about this is that B good and A mostly bad. That being said, it was kind of exactly what Crew needed, and behind a crazy good performance from Asheti and Klaus, his flashes were great, they actually took Pearl 13-10. Alright, so momentum has to be at a high right now for Crew. You just won the map pick of the best team in the league, and you now get to enter your choice of ascent. It's everything that you could ask for, right? And for the first few rounds, it was. Crew were up 5-1 before it happened. The devastating Loud pause. Honorary Brazilian fraud took the mic and made the call that seemed to flip a switch for Loud. Immediately, Loud were playing more dynamic in their mid rounds, calling immediately a sick A execute cancel into a late round into B. But it still wasn't a great half, to be honest. Despite all of that nerd shit that I just talked about, obviously Crew were still optimizing, calling pauses, and making pivots of their own. The half ended 8-4 in the favor of Crew, who were now looking upset bound. Things continued to be rough in this second half for Loud, and at one point Crew were up 11-7 before yet another fraud pause. After that, Aspas headlined a sick comeback for Loud when he picked up the op, and the team was miraculously able to win 13-11, forcing Split as the decider. Split got off to an okay start for Loud. A f***ing 7-1? Well, okay, despite that, Crew actually clawed together a few more rounds to give us another 8-4 scoreline at the half, obviously in favor of Loud this time. But honestly, midway through the second half, though, you'd actually start to believe that Crew actually had a really good shot of keeping this game going their way. They always seemed to screw with Loud's eco when it mattered the most, and they also shut down a lot of the early gambits that they were trying. It didn't last forever, though, and eventually Loud started to win some of these fights and get those advantage states that they wanted, and they ended up closing out the series with a 13-10.
And that's it for VCT America's Week 6. I'd like to thank you all so much for watching. It is Gus's editor Yeti back on the mic. If you enjoyed, make sure to drop a like below, subscribe. If you have any feedback, make sure to drop it in the comment section below. We make sure to really read all those and take everything into account. So thank you all very much. If you want to see the latest news from UpMind, make sure to follow him here on Twitter. And if you want to see him live, go to here on Twitch. And yeah, thank you all so much for watching.